Today I'm going to talk about risk assessment and in particular to construction. I found from working within the industry, a detailed risk assessment as well as a method statement are needed, especially for gaining party wall approval so works can start. If you are new to my channel, please feel free to subscribe, hit the bell notifications below so you don't miss any of my new videos. So, what is a risk assessment? According to the HSE, also known as the Health and Safety Executive, a risk assessment is a vital element known for health and safety. Its main objective is to measure and determine what is required to comply with statutory duty under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 and associated regulations by reducing the level of incidents and accidents that occur. Why do we need to do a risk assessment? So a risk assessment will protect your workers and your business as well as complying to the law. When you do a risk assessment, it should simply be conducted before you do any other employees or get them to conduct any sort of work, as it could present a risk to injury to their health. A person from your organization needs to attend a risk assessment training, as it will ensure the person is competent within your organization and will gain abilities such as hazard identification, the ability to categorize and evaluate risks, and this will help you to assess different risks within a particular situation. How to do a risk assessment? The main 5 steps to do a risk assessment would be to identify what hazards would occur, decide who would be the initial person it would harm, evaluate the risks and decide what control measures you would do in relation to that risk and how to reduce it, eliminate it, or avoid it completely. Record your findings and implement them. And the 5th one would be review your assessment and update if necessary. And I would say with the 5th point, review your assessment. After projects progress, especially within construction, you will need to assess and update as necessary, because each stage of the process of construction will require different risk assessments. Step 1. Identifying the hazards. In order to identify the hazards, you need to understand the difference between a hazard and a risk. A hazard is something that has the potential to cause harm, and the risk is the likelihood that the potential harm can be realized. Hazards can be identified by using a number of different techniques, such as walking around the workplace or asking your employees. Step 2. Who will be harmed? This is deciding who will be harmed and how. Once you have decided the number of hazards that you need to understand who might be harmed and how, such as people walking into the warehouse, members of the public, or members of staff, or operators. Step 3. Evaluate the risk and decide on control measures. After identifying the hazards and deciding who will be harmed and how, you need to require to protect the people from harm. The hazards can either be removed completely or the risk controlled so that injury is unlikely or reduced. Step 4 is to record your findings. Your findings, especially with risk assessment, should be written down in a legal requirement. Where there are 5 or more employees, there should be a risk assessment completed. By recording the findings, it shows that you have identified the hazard, decided who will be harmed and how, and it also shows how you plan to eliminate the risks and hazards. Step 5 is review your assessment and update it when needed. You should never forget that a few workplaces stay the same, and as a result, the risk assessment should be reviewed and updated when required. In particular to construction, different stages of a project at the design phase and then the initiation stage, from demolition to turning around and finishing off, each require a different risk assessment. So risk assessment should be updated accordingly over the course of your project. And as a summary, this is the 5 steps that you need to do when you're completing your risk assessment. So identify your risk factors, see who can be harmed and how, evaluate the risks, record your findings, monitor and review. And this is an example of a risk assessment that I had completed in one of the construction sites. So this is in specific to operatives with scaffolding, and you can see this is the hazard. Number 1 would be what are the hazards, and this will be slip, trips and falls. Number 2 is directly who would be affected by that hazard. So at this point is the operatives and visitors to sites. What are the risks associated with that hazard? So they could suffer injuries, sprains, fractures, poor housekeeping if the site in construction has a poor layout. Someone could trip over a wire, and the following control measures in place. So what measures are you going to take to try and eliminate the hazard of that, or the likelihood of that happening? So the area should be kept clear of constructions. Any spillages should be cleaned up immediately. All areas should be well lit, especially the stairs, and then any hazards trailing such as cables, obstacles, unlevel ground should be reported immediately to the manager or the location person responsible for safety. So then you can see on the side, you can see the risk evaluation would be ongoing, supervision and good housekeeping. So this is obviously in that sense saying that trips, falls and slips are an ongoing process that will occur at any stage in any project, and it requires constant monitoring. The consequence of you falling down, trips and falls and slips, in this sequence they put 1. The likelihood of that happening would be medium, which is probably 2, and the overall risk of that happening, if anything did happen when you fall down, you injure yourself, you could fracture your leg, you could sprain an ankle, you could do things like that could be the consequence of falling down from a slip, trip or fall. So this is an outline of a risk assessment and obviously the control measures with that. So you can see in this example, this goes through the hazards that may be applicable to the job or the work activity. So it shows here the ones that are unlikely to be possible: minor injuries, significant injuries and major injuries. So significant injuries and major injuries possible and probable, those are the ones you need to look out for. So the ones in red, so the high, extreme high ones, you need to be able to have reduced or possibly avoid if necessary. So you have to take things into consideration, how you're going to protect someone from falling at a height. Those types of considerations are something to think about when you're doing a risk assessment. So a RAM's risk assessment and method statement is slightly different. It's a combination of both a risk assessment as well as a method statement. And this is vital when you have party wall agreements. Most of the aspects will include aspects of risk assessment, but in addition to that, they will have method statements to break down for that individual project. So say if you're having a subcontractor coming in and they're doing scaffolding or they're doing demolition, you'll need to have aspects of that risk assessment according to what you're going to do. So say if you're doing demolition, you need to say what the risks in relation to that demolition, as well as how step by step the method of you're going to demolish that building or that project or whatever you're working on. And in addition to that, you would have to include emergency procedures. So if you have, say, a tunnel, you're doing excavations and you have a risk of that collapsing, you need to be able to have emergency procedures outlined in that document. So in terms of your risk assessment, you'll be able to outline this is the emergency procedure we will take in place if these risks were to happen. You also need to include any types of different risks and the levels of risk as shown previously in the previous slides. So the different types of risks would be slips, trips and falls. There will be falling at height is a different type of risk, because falling at height has a greater concern. It kills most people within the construction industry, and that is usually why health and safety get involved, and then they end up closing a site or having a prohibition on a site because someone has lost their life and something has happened seriously. You also need to have any rescue plans outlined within that risk assessment, and you will also need to have any plans or drawings. It's not always optional, because it's not mandatory, but it's optional to include any plans or drawings within that risk assessment or method statement. The drawings usually help the more method statement side of things. When you're doing a step-by-step guide, you usually have pictures of this is how stage 1 is going to be performed, and this is the risk associated with that, how we're going to mitigate those risks and continue further on with the rest of the stages. So any additional information you need, the Health and Safety Executive have some additional information about how to do a risk assessment, what law is needed or what you're required to do on a risk assessment by law. If you need any of this additional information, I'll include it on the links below the video so you can use them as a reference to go back on. So if you love this video and you like more videos like this, click subscribe below, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll personally answer to them.